They say some people just can't stand seeing others in peace, and my new neighbor proved it true. When she moved next door, she made it her mission to control everything, including my farm gate. She sent letters, spread rumors, and when nothing worked, she called the cops, thinking she could finally win. But there was one thing she didn't know: I'm the sheriff of this county. And that call? It didn't just backfire, it changed everything. This is the story of how one Karen tried to take my freedom, and ended up learning what happens when you mess with the law itself. It all began on a quiet morning in the countryside, where peace was usually measured by the soft hum of tractors and the gentle rustle of wind across open fields. For years, the farm had stood as a symbol of independence and hard work, acres of green stretching as far as the eye could see, guarded by a sturdy black iron gate at its entrance. That gate wasn't just metal and hinges, it was pride, privacy, and protection from the chaos beyond. The owner of the land, a man who valued honesty, discipline, and fairness, had lived there most of his life. He wasn't just any farmer, he also happened to be the county sheriff, a man respected by his community for his sense of justice and calm authority. Life in the countryside moved at its own pace, slow and steady, until one particular neighbor moved in, a woman whose presence seemed to disturb even the peace of the land itself. She arrived in a spotless SUV, armed with rules, paperwork, and an attitude that could slice through steel. Within days, the neighborhood began whispering her name in irritation. She was the kind of person who believed that every fence post, mailbox, and lawn decoration needed her personal approval. Her obsession with control came wrapped in polite smiles that barely hid her contempt for anyone who didn't follow her version of the rules. At first, the sheriff tried to stay polite. Everyone deserved a fair chance, even a meddlesome newcomer. But it didn't take long before the complaints started, about the height of the fence, the color of the barn, the presence of livestock, and finally, the gate. To her, the gate represented defiance, a symbol that someone dared to live freely without her supervision. Every morning, she would drive past the property, glaring at the entrance as if the gate had personally insulted her. Soon enough, she began spreading rumors among the small HOA committee that managed the nearby residential area. Though the sheriff's land wasn't technically under HOA jurisdiction, that didn't stop her from trying to enforce her imaginary authority. One afternoon, a letter appeared in his mailbox. It was printed on official-looking HOA stationery, demanding the immediate removal of unauthorized gate structures. Most people would have been angry. The sheriff, however, simply shook his head and carried on with his day. He had handled far worse confrontations in his career than a self-appointed neighborhood watchdog. Days passed, and the tension grew. Karen, as the neighbors had started calling her, escalated her campaign. She took pictures of the gate, stood outside the property muttering into her phone, and even cornered other residents into signing a petition that held no legal weight whatsoever. The sheriff ignored it all, trusting that reason would eventually prevail. But Karen wasn't built for reason, she thrived on control. When her letters and petitions failed, she decided it was time to make things official. In her mind, there was no higher power than the HOA, except maybe the law. And if the sheriff wouldn't take down his gate voluntarily, she would make sure the law forced him to. The day she called the police was bright and calm, the kind of morning where the air smelled of freshly cut grass and distant rain. She stood at the entrance of the property, arms crossed, waiting with self-satisfied confidence. Her phone call had been filled with exaggerated claims, words like illegal construction, public safety hazard, and non-compliance with HOA standards. As the distant hum of sirens grew louder, she smiled, convinced her victory was minutes away. The sheriff was inside the barn, tending to chores, unaware of the storm gathering at his gate. When the first patrol car arrived, the scene looked almost theatrical: flashing lights, swirling dust, and a woman standing proudly as if leading a crusade for justice. The deputies stepped out, uncertain about what they were walking into. Karen pointed dramatically toward the gate, gesturing as if she had uncovered a major crime. She began explaining her version of events, her voice growing louder and more self-righteous by the second. Then, one of the officers recognized the address. His posture shifted, his expression changed, and his hand instinctively rose to his radio. Within moments, the mood transformed from confrontation to confusion. The man they were supposedly investigating was their own commanding officer, the county sheriff himself. The barn door creaked open, and the sheriff walked out, brushing off his gloves, calm as ever. The sunlight glinted off his badge as he approached, completely unaware of the drama unfolding outside his gate. The deputies straightened immediately, exchanging nervous glances. Karen, still speaking with authority, had no idea what was about to happen. When the officers saw him, they instinctively stepped aside, their demeanor turning respectful and alert. Karen's confident smirk began to fade as she noticed their shift in tone. What she thought would be her moment of triumph was quickly unraveling. The situation had turned upside down before she could comprehend why. The sheriff listened patiently, allowing the scene to play out. The officers clarified the misunderstanding, and the truth began to sink in. She had just called the police on the sheriff himself. The air grew heavy with silence, broken only by the faint hum of police radios and the wind moving through the nearby fields. Karen's expression twisted from arrogance to disbelief. The officers, trying to maintain professionalism, could barely hide their discomfort. The sheriff said little, but his calm authority said everything. He didn't need to raise his voice, the situation spoke for itself. By the time the patrol cars turned around, the dust of her mistake was already settling. The woman who once strutted with power now stood frozen, embarrassed and furious in equal measure. Yet, the sheriff knew this wasn't over. People like her rarely gave up after humiliation, they doubled down. And deep down he could feel it, this was only the beginning. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the fields, the sheriff closed his gate once more. But he knew the peace of his farm had been disturbed for good. Somewhere behind those perfect lawns and painted fences, Karen was plotting her next move. The game between control and authority had just begun. The following days carried an uneasy calm across the countryside. After the incident at the gate, the sheriff went about his duties as if nothing had happened, patrolling the county roads, helping residents, and maintaining his quiet life. But beneath that calm, he remained aware that Karen wouldn't stop so easily. For people like her, embarrassment only fueled obsession. Her pride had been bruised in front of police officers, and humiliation was something she could neither forget nor forgive. Behind her closed doors, she spent hours drafting new complaints, searching for new loopholes, and calling anyone who might listen. To her, this wasn't over, it had become a personal mission to prove she was right. Meanwhile, the town quietly buzzed with the story. News spread faster than wildfire in small communities, and everyone now knew about the woman who had called the police on the sheriff himself. Some found it hilarious, others pitied her, and a few avoided her altogether. But Karen didn't care about gossip. She convinced herself that the sheriff had abused his power, and she would find a way to make him answer for it. She began contacting higher HOA officials, digging through county building codes, and even sending letters to the local newspaper. Each complaint was more exaggerated than the last. Claims about safety violations, illegal livestock, noise disturbances, and even accusations that the sheriff was using his position for personal gain. The sheriff received copies of every letter, yet he never responded. His silence wasn't weakness, it was patience. He had dealt with troublemakers before. The trick was to let them show the world exactly who they were before acting. And Karen, through her relentless crusade, was doing just that. Weeks passed, and her frustration deepened. The HOA board finally sent a representative to inspect the farm, only to discover that everything was fully compliant and well within legal boundaries. Karen's complaints were dismissed, one by one. But instead of backing down, she escalated again, this time, with a plan that crossed the line. One early morning before sunrise, she arrived with 2 hired contractors. Her goal was simple, to take the gate down herself. She waved around a fake authorization letter printed on HOA paper and ordered them to begin dismantling it. The men hesitated, uncertain, but her confidence convinced them. The sound of metal tools striking against iron broke the stillness of dawn. Inside the farmhouse, the sheriff stirred. He wasn't a man who startled easily, but he recognized that sound immediately, the unmistakable clatter of intrusion. Within minutes, he stepped outside, calm and composed, yet every step measured with quiet authority. The headlights from the contractor's truck illuminated the scene. The once proud gate now halfway unbolted, its hinges loose, and Karen standing nearby with folded arms, watching with smug satisfaction. The sheriff observed in silence for a moment, allowing the scene to unfold long enough for proof. Then, he retrieved his phone and began recording. By the time the contractors noticed him, it was too late. The law had already been broken. Unauthorized property damage, trespassing and impersonation of legal authority, all documented, time-stamped and witnessed. Karen's triumphant smirk faltered the instant she realized what she had done. Within the hour, official patrol cars arrived, this time, summoned not by her, but by the sheriff himself. The same flashing lights that once signaled her imagined victory now reflected off her pale, shocked face. The officers treated her with the same professionalism they offered anyone, but the difference in tone was unmistakable. The law she had tried to manipulate was now staring her down, firm and unflinching. The contractors, nervous and apologetic, quickly admitted they were misled by her false documents. They were released with warnings, their involvement deemed unintentional. But for Karen, it was different. Her actions carried consequences, and this time, there was no misunderstanding to hide behind. The sheriff didn't raise his voice, didn't gloat, and didn't humiliate her in public. Instead, he allowed the process to speak. The charges were filed, the evidence submitted, and the law moved forward without bias. In a matter of days, she faced not only fines for property damage but also an official notice for falsifying HOA authorization. Her confidence collapsed like a house built on sand. The same people who once tolerated her complaints now distanced themselves. The HOA, eager to preserve its reputation, removed her from all positions and issued a statement disavowing her actions. Her phone, once a weapon of control, went silent. The sheriff continued his work as usual. His gate, now repaired and stronger than before, stood tall as a symbol, not just of property, but of patience and justice. Life slowly returned to its peaceful rhythm. The fields grew lush again, the livestock roamed freely, and the faint scent of fresh grass replaced the tension that had once lingered in the air. Yet there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that the lesson had been delivered without cruelty. The sheriff didn't believe in revenge, he believed in order. But fate, in its quiet wisdom, had given Karen exactly what she needed to understand the limits of control. As weeks turned into months, she avoided the sheriff's property entirely. Her once daily patrols down the country road stopped. The HOA meetings she dominated now continued without her interruptions. The neighborhood, for the first time in months, felt free again. On one calm evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the sheriff stood by his gate, watching the orange light fade into the soft blue of dusk. The air was clean, the silence peaceful, and the world seemed balanced once more. The gate creaked slightly in the breeze, sturdy, immovable, and enduring, just like the man who stood beside it. For him, it had never been about power. It had been about boundaries, both the physical gate that marked his land, and the invisible one that defined respect. And in the end, both had held strong. The story of Karen and the sheriff became something of a legend in the county. People told it as a cautionary tale, a reminder that arrogance can't outrun accountability, and that sometimes, karma doesn't need help, it just needs time. And so, the sheriff closed his gate for the night, the sound echoing softly across the quiet fields. Justice had been served, peace had returned, and somewhere far away, Karen had finally learned the one rule she could never rewrite. You can challenge a man's patience, but you can't outrank the truth. End of chapter 2, the end.